When we talk about the Philippine minimum wage, the conversation usually goes one way, right? It's too low. But what if? What if that entire idea is not just wrong, but actually backward? Today, we're going to dig into a really provocative analysis that makes a startling claim. The minimum wage isn't too low. It's dangerously high. So let's jump in and see what the numbers have to say about this. And this quote, wow, it really sets the stage for the whole argument. The idea here is that our public discussion about wages is kind of stopped being about smart economics. Instead, it's turned into what the author calls moral theater. Where we focus on feeling like we're doing the right thing, even if the results, well, even if they're just not working.
I mean, we all know this story, don't we? It's the one we hear all the time. And it's powerful. It's popular for a good reason. The narrative is super simple. You've got greedy companies, you've got exploited workers, and the government has to be the hero and step in to make it all fair. And you know what? Emotionally, it feels right. It just does.
Okay, but here's where things take a sharp turn. This is the pivot. The analysis we're looking at throws a wrench in the whole thing by asking a really tough question. What if that story, as good as it sounds, has it all backward? What if the very policy that's supposed to help workers is actually the thing that's holding them back?
So to really get our heads around this, we need to do something. We have to step away from that moral theater we talked about and just look at the cold, hard data. Because this whole argument, it's not about good intentions. It's about the numbers. And the most important number of all is productivity.
All right, first things first, let's just look at the wage itself. So if you look at the official data for Metro Manila, the daily minimum wage is about $10.70. Now, put that next to its neighbors like Vietnam or Cambodia, you can see it's quite a bit higher. So on paper, you'd look at this and think, wow, the Philippines actually has a pretty generous minimum wage, especially for the region.
But here it is. This might be the most important question we ask today. High relative to what? See, a wage isn't just high or low all by itself in some kind of vacuum. Its real value, whether it's actually sustainable for the economy, depends completely on what you're comparing it to.
And that brings us to the key concept here, labor productivity. It sounds technical, but it's pretty simple. It's just the amount of economic value a worker creates in an hour of work. Think about it. If a law says you have to pay someone more than the value they produce for your business, well, it becomes impossible economically for that business to hire them.
Okay, and this is where the whole story just flips on its head. Remember that high wage we just saw? Well, it turns out that Philippine labor productivity, that value a worker creates per hour, it's actually lower than in a place like Indonesia, and it's not that much higher than Vietnam's. And right there, that's the start of the whole problem. You've got a high wage, but only kind of so-so productivity.
So this table kind of puts it all together. When you have that high wage combined with modest productivity, what you end up with is something called a high unit labor cost. Here's a simple way to think about it. For every dollar of value a worker is creating, the business has to shell out a bigger chunk of that dollar in wages. Now look at Vietnam. Their wages are lower, so it's cheaper for a business to hire someone to produce that same amount of value. So here's the big takeaway from all this data. The analysis concludes that Philippine labor, well, it isn't cheap at all. In fact, when you measure the wage against what's actually being produced, it's one of the most expensive in the region. This is the aha moment, the core idea that everything else is built on.
Okay, so we've established this mismatch, right? High wages, but productivity that hasn't quite caught up. So what? Why does this even matter? Well, according to this analysis, this isn't just an academic exercise. It leads to some really serious, on-the-ground consequences.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly explains the basic economics of it. You can pass a law that says you must pay someone 610 pesos a day. But what you can't do is pass a law that magically makes that person produce 610 pesos worth of value. So if their output is less than that wage, a legal, formal business just can't hire them. The math doesn't work. And this creates a domino effect with three huge problems. First, you get a boom in the informal economy. Businesses start hiring people off the books because they can't afford the official rate. Second, it creates this weird dual or two-tiered economy. You have formal, high-productivity jobs in the big cities where businesses can afford the wage, and then this huge informal sector everywhere else. And third, it stalls progress. Workers get stuck in low-skill jobs because companies just aren't willing to risk formally hiring and investing in training them. And that leads to this really painful paradox for the average person looking for work. The country has a policy that's meant to guarantee a good wage, but at the very same time, it makes finding a formal, stable job, the kind of job that actually pays that wage, so much harder to find. And this hits the lowest skilled workers the hardest. All right, so if that's the trap we're in, how do we get out? What's the solution? Well, the analysis lays it out as a clear choice between two very different paths.
On one hand, you have what the source calls the wrong medicine. That's where we just keep passing laws to force the minimum wage higher and higher. It feels good, it's popular, but all it really does is make it even harder to get a formal job. Then, on the other hand, you have the real cure. And that's about shifting our entire focus to one thing: raising worker productivity. If you do that, wages can then rise naturally, sustainably, on their own.
Okay, but raise productivity sounds great, but how do you actually do that? It's not easy. The analysis says it requires some deep structural changes. We're talking about things like opening up major industries, telecom, retail, logistics, to more foreign competition. It means making it easier for new businesses to even get started. And it means having more flexible labor rules so that companies feel safe to hire people formally and invest in their training. But even beyond those really tough reforms, the analysis we're looking at goes one giant step further. It puts an even more radical and, frankly, more controversial idea on the table. And here it is: the source actually suggests abolishing the minimum wage completely. Now, the logic goes like this. If you get rid of that artificial price floor for labor, you remove the single biggest wall that's keeping low-skilled workers out of the formal economy. In theory, businesses could then hire way more people at whatever the market rate is, pulling thousands out of unstable, under-the-table kinds of jobs. And that brings us to the final, really thought-provoking question that this analysis leaves us with. It kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what is the real goal of economic policy? Is it to do things that give us a sense of moral satisfaction, things that feel good? Or is it to do the hard, maybe even unpopular things that actually work? The choice, as this analysis frames it, is between a policy that feels right and a policy that gets the job done.